I'll go ahead and open up the property pages. Right-click there and select Properties. And there you have the different tabs where various options are hidden. So the default tab is the first one, Project Settings. This contains settings that apply to all project configurations, whether for debug, release, or any others that you create. And all of the current selections that you see are the default settings for a brand new project. I haven't changed any of these yet. So one of the options is the target platform. As you can see, I can target a SQL Server 2005, 2008, 2012, or SQL Azure database. I'll leave the default set to 2012. The important thing about this option is that if you select an older version of SQL Server or SQL Azure, the project won't build if you use features that aren't available in those versions. So by selecting the correct target platform, I'm having SQL Server data tools help me build a project that is going to execute and exist well within that version of SQL Server. The Project Settings tab also has this Enable Extended Transact SQL Verification for Common Objects. Now, if you click this More Information link, then your default web browser will open to the documentation page for this feature, which contains a description that says, quote, Extended Transact SQL Verification is a feature within the database project system that allows developers to submit their database project to the Transact SQL compiler service at build time to validate their code against the SQL Server engine's parser and interpreter, end quote. The feature essentially provides a higher level of validation of the database object that you define in the project by simulating the actual creation of the object and letting the SQL Server database engine itself verify that all is well. It's a much higher level of validation, but it takes a fair amount of time. If you're interested in using that, definitely you want to visit that More Information link and learn more about it. All right, you can also do things like specify the default schema if you don't specify one within the definition of the object. But you really should always specify it within the definition of the object. And then you can also specify whether or not you want to include the schema name in the file name. And then the Database Settings button here opens up a Database Settings dialog box that lets you specify things like the database collation and various set statement options, default operational settings, as you can see there's a fair number, and a whole bunch of other miscellaneous settings. When you import a database into a project, you can have the import wizard read these settings from the existing database, and then you can change them as you like. It's another kind of a change that you can make to the database itself. All right, then the next two tabs, SQL CLR and the SQL CLR build, have settings that relate to SQL CLR code in the project, which you write with .NET Framework code and languages. And the settings in these tabs deal with how to compile that code and how to deploy it to the database. We don't have any of that kind of code within this project, so we don't need to worry about these settings here. All right, the next tab that I want to talk about that's relevant for database projects is Debug. This tab has a number of settings that control how you can debug the code in your project, including code modules such as stored procedures written in Transact SQL. The settings here are a mix of those for general Visual Studio applications and a few that are specific for database projects. So most of the settings that are interesting to a database project are down here in the lower part of the screen. This one is potentially a little bit misleading. This is the target connection string. This is the connection information for the database server that's used for the selected build configuration, which is debugged by default, and it uses a local DB instance, you can see that right there, of SQL Server that's used for application purposes. This is not the string used for publishing your changes. Don't be confused about that. And usually, you don't need to worry about this setting within a database project. So don't be confused that there's a weird database connection string there. The deployment options here are more relevant. This deploy database properties specifies whether you want database properties deployed with the project to the database. Generally, you'll want to leave this set so that you can make changes to database properties in the project and they'll be published to the database. And then there's always recreate database. This does just what it says. Every time you publish the database, Data Tools will drop the database in the target instance of SQL Server and recreate it using the object definitions in the project. In the early stages of a database project that you create from scratch, you might want to check this setting, since the database schema is probably changing so much at that point. Later, you can turn it off when the schema becomes stable. And you'll almost certainly want to leave this unchecked if you imported a database. Otherwise, you could lose existing data and objects in that existing database. Then the next interesting option here is block incremental deployment if data loss might occur. This is an important setting if you want to be sure that you don't lose existing data in the database. With this set, as it is by default, Data Tools will prevent deployment if you've made a change that could cause data loss, even if data in a column might be truncated, such as maybe when you change an nvarchar 50 column to an nvarchar 20. And here's another important one, drop objects in target but not in project. This will cause any objects that exist in the target database to be dropped if they're not defined in this database project. Sounds kind of scary, but this is useful if you want to delete objects in the project and have those deletions deployed to the database. But the option's unchecked by default, so you don't inadvertently lose any objects in the database. All right, then the Advanced button here opens the Advanced Deployment Settings dialog box. This includes many other deployment options. It's definitely worthwhile familiarizing yourself with the options here so you know where to look when you need to fine-tune your database deployment. As you can see, there's a lot of options there. The last interesting tab is Code Analysis. The Code Analysis feature in Visual Studio can perform static code analysis to help you discover potential problems with your database project scripts, ranging from naming problems to performance issues. Okay, so as you can see, there's 3 different categories of rules: data design, data naming, and data performance. So these are all the checks that you can include in your code. You can enable or disable each rule individually, each category of rules, and this checkbox at the top lets you specify that you want to run code analysis every time you build a project. Otherwise, you can perform the analysis manually. So let's go ahead and perform the static code analysis on the Northwind Updates project. So this will provide an indication of how well Microsoft complied with its own rules for database development. All right, so I'll go over here into Solution Explorer, right-click on Northwind Updates, and select Run Code Analysis. And I'll go out and start the analysis. So as you can see, the code analysis finds a pretty big number of problems, a total of 52 warnings. And this checkboxes over here allow you to treat any warnings as errors. These are all unchecked, so all of these are warnings, and the project can compile. Now, this is a little bit hard to see because it includes the full path and file name of the location of the problem that it found. But if we scroll over here a bit, we can see the category of rule that was violated and then information about the problem. And so, for example, here's one: data loss might occur when casting from ASCII string 8 to date time. I can scroll back up here. Here's an object name, order subtotals, that contains special characters. So in this case, the special character is a space, but this is a nice warning if you want to keep your database clean and use all valid SQL identifiers. So you don't have to keep using square brackets around this name anytime you refer to it within Transact SQL code. Here's one that says the shape of the result set produced by a select star statement will change if the underlying table or view structure changes. One of the risks of using select star. Now, this is an awful lot of errors. It can be a little bit overwhelming, Well, one nice feature here is that I can double click on any of these and it'll take me directly to the location where that problem occurs. As you can see, I even get a little bit of IntelliSense there as a result of that code analysis. And I can fix it or ignore it or whatever it is that I want to do with it. Okay, so code analysis found an awful lot of problems with the Northwind database. But I got to be fair. The Northwind sample database has been around for a very long time and was originally built when priorities were different. More recent sample databases from Microsoft generally do a better job of passing muster with this code analysis. Okay, so once you've written all your code, gotten your project in shape, checked all the code analysis, made any changes to the objects that you want to change, then it's time to publish the changes. And this applies whether you're creating a new database from scratch or making changes to an existing database. So in data tools terms, this is called publishing your database. And as with most database tasks, data tools makes this remarkably easy. So in this exercise, I'm going to deploy the changes that I made to the Northwind Updates project to the Northwind database. Remember that the change that I made was to the description column in the categories table to not allow null values. In a real project, of course, you'd probably have made dozens or hundreds of changes that can be deployed all at once. Okay, so I'll close down that window, come back over here to Solution Explorer, and right-click on the project, and select Publish. And that opens up this Publish Database dialog box. All right, now this is the first time that I've published the Northwind Updates project, so there isn't any existing database connection information here. So I need to click the Edit button in order to create the connection. Okay, so I'll type in local. I'll use Windows Authentication. And then notice that it fills in the name of the project as the target database. Instead, I want to apply the changes to the Northwind database. So I'll select that from the drop-down list. All right, I'll click on Test Connection. That succeeded. And click on OK. And now I have that database connection set. And if I need to, I can clear it, I can edit it, whatever. Notice that as soon as I did that, it filled in the database name with Northwind. And then it also gives a default published script name. Once again, it's the name of the project, but I can name it any valid file name. Now this is the early stage of working with this database project. I'm probably going to be deploying this over and over again. So I want to save this profile so I don't have to create that connection information every time. So I'll click on the Save Profile As, and it'll put it by default in the project folder, and I'll accept the default name here. Notice that it saves it as an XML file. Okay? All right, so the nice thing is once again, when I publish the database the next time, I can come here, load the profile, and open that file, and all my settings will be made. And I can edit them if I want before I publish them. You can create as many profiles as you wish for a database project. This lets you publish the database to different SQL Server instances, to different databases, and using different authentication credentials. Okay, so now I can either publish or generate script. I'm going to generate the script in this case. We'll go out, compare the databases, and generate the script in order to apply these changes to the database. Now, once again, this contains a lot of general purpose script that can handle any type of database changes. But if we scroll down a bit, the important code is right here, because that's changing the table in order to change the description column's schema. And then there's various other things that also refreshes some of the objects that are dependent upon the categories table. So that's some additional code down here. If you want to apply the changes to the Northwind database, you can either execute this script or again publish the database. But this time you'd use the Publish button on the Publish Database dialog box. But I'm already here, the script is already here. I'm going to go ahead and just execute the script directly. I do want to make sure that I don't have anything selected, because just like a query editor window in Management Studio, if I click Execute with this code highlighted, only this code will execute, and I'll lose the benefit of some of the other checking that Data Tools does. Okay, so I'll click on the Execute button here. Oh, rats, we got an error. All right, so what this says is that rows were detected. The schema update is terminating because data loss might occur. An error was encountered during execution of batch, exiting. Now, in this case, Data Tools is being overly paranoid. It sees that we're making a change from allowing nulls to disallowing them. It doesn't look at the existing data in the table. It just assumes that there might be a problem, which is definitely the safer assumption to make. Okay, so if we look through this code right here. So what this comment says is the column description on table dbo.categories must be changed from null to not null. That's the change we defined. If the table contains data, I'll put in a carriage return so it's easier to read. If the table contains data, the alter script may not work. To avoid this issue, you must add values to this column for all rows or mark it as allowing null values, or enable the generation of smart defaults as a deployment option. And here's the code that's doing that check. So it just checks to see if there are any rows in the categories table. And then it raises that error, and that's where this error message right here came from. All right, now this is a situation where you'll need to modify the generated update script. And the easiest way to do that is just to comment out this code right here. In this case, I know that the data in the categories table is fine. There are non-null descriptions for every row, and so this really doesn't apply. All right, I'll save the file, make sure I don't have anything selected, and execute it. And now this time the update was complete. So it altered categories, and then it refreshed the objects that are dependent upon categories.